The WHO are meeting next week to discuss the pandemic accord, which would radically expand its powers. Nothing to worry about there then. Hello there, you 5.6 million awakening wonders. If you want to awaken even quicker, why don't you sign up to my side channel, Awakening with Russell Brand. It's just one click away. I do meditations on there. I talk about well-being. I talk about how to avoid banging your fingers on a desk when you're listing things on your fingers. It's a treasure trove of useful information. If you don't subscribe to this channel yet, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bells at the end. I'll tell you how to sign up to my mailing list. But before any of that, let's discuss the WHO, the World Health Organization, who care about the world's health. You're on the world, that's where you live. So hopefully they've got you in their hearts when they're meeting next week. Let's see what's going to happen. Primarily, they're interested in expanding powers of regulation around pandemics. This is from the Telegraph. On the 22nd of May, the World Health Organization meets for the World Health Assembly, an annual summit to which all the world's countries are invited, except Taiwan, which is excluded at China's behest. Would you mind if everyone except Taiwan came? Well, it seems a bit unfair on Taiwan. We don't like them. We don't think there should even be a Taiwan. On the agenda is the pandemic accord that would greatly expand the WHO's powers to intervene in a country in the event of a future outbreak. Why do they want these powers? Like, it's meant to be a health organisation. We're here to help. You're all right, I don't want any help. You're having help! The European Union, true to form, pushed for a legally binding pandemic treaty instead, but the accord would still have substantial force of international law behind it to make governments impose domestic lockdowns, for example, despite the WHO's own figures showing little correlation between lockdown severity and death rates. If their own figures show little correlation between the severity of the lockdown and death figures, then what is the reason for severe lockdowns? If something cannot be underwritten rationally, then what is the reason for it? I feel we are in a situation where people perpetuate power for power's sake, where the World Health Organization would just want to increase their regulatory abilities. I also don't like, by the way, the idea that they're anticipating the next pandemic. I don't want to be naive. Pandemics are awful. No one wants disease. No one wants to be unhealthy. But my personal sense is that the solution to our individual and our collective and our national and our local problems is not to grant more power to an organisation that's primarily funded by the United States of America, then Bill Gates's foundation, then the United Kingdom. I think that they might be subject to biases that are at odds with your health requirements, my health requirements, various health requirements. I bet our health requirements differ, don't you imagine? We've got different requirements. I don't want more power externally imposed on me. I want less. I don't want less freedom. I want more freedom. I don't want more regulation. They're taking us in the wrong direction. And it seems to me like they're using various crises and threats to introduce regulations that won't be rescinded and, generally speaking, are advantageous to already powerful interests. Though some of the measures make sense, the plan skates around WHO's errors during the COVID pandemic. And we'll just skate around that. Your own errors are the signifiers from deeper reality as to where you could improve. If you ignore your own errors, I'm just speaking as an individual, where I have made errors in the past, that's where I'm most able to learn. And I'm not in charge of whether or not your country is going to have a lockdown in the event of another pandemic. It ignored Taiwan's early alarm call, praised the Chinese government for its transparency at a time when it was denying human-to-human transmissions and punishing whistleblowers, delayed declaring a health emergency, flip-flopped on masks and lockdowns, and mounted a farcical Potemkin investigation into the origin of the virus. But otherwise okay? Added to its poor performance in the 2014 Ebola outbreak, when for months the WHO resisted calls from doctors and NGOs to declare an emergency to avoid offending member governments, this track record does not inspire confidence. No, they're rubbish at pandemics. Right, this is what you should do in the event of a pandemic. What's your previous? Oh, well, I'll tell you what, last pandemic we made a lot of mistakes. We punished whistleblowers. We needlessly offended Taiwanese people. We said wear masks, then don't. We get all of our funding from some billionaires and we generally do what they tell us to do. Will you do what we tell you during the next pandemic? Yes. Yes, we will. And we'll make it law that everyone has to do it. That's not what you want, is it? Can you see where the world is going? More and more centralized power. More and more bureaucracy that's out of reach of democracy. More use of technology to create data systems that prevent us from having real freedom. That is the function of technocracy. These things have been measured. These are the outcomes. These are the results. Even if those results don't chime with your experience of being alive in the world. I say we need to go in the opposite direction. I'm not in denial of progress in areas of technology and medicine and the miracles that have been provided in both of those fields, but we have to understand who we are as a species. We have to recognise what's happening on our planet more broadly. According to the meeting's agenda, the Accord would be part of 6 action tracks focused on healthcare systems, zoonotic outbreaks, endemic tropical diseases, food safety, antimicrobial resistance, and protecting the environment. What is missing from that list? Well, one thing is laboratory safety and standards within the pharmaceutical industry. And in the event of another pandemic, if a medicine is contrived or conceived, that medicine's profits should go back into supporting the communities that ultimately had to fund it. Because even if you live in a country like mine, the UK, where the vaccines were provided by the National Health Service, the National Health Service is of course funded by you, by the taxpayer. And those profits were then extracted by those pharmaceutical companies who made all that profit during an emergency where there was very little choice as to whether or not you used their product. So I would say that's irresponsible and something that could be addressed, particularly by a World Health Organization. I mean, that'd be a great thing to do. We are the world. We're a health organization. We're going to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again. Oh, no, actually, we're going to let that happen again. We're going to ensure, in fact, that happens again. So what's missing from that list? Something WHO itself and the US and other governments insist might well have been the cause of the COVID pandemic, namely a laboratory experiment gone wrong or a virus-hunting researcher infected while sampling bats in the field. Increasingly, this theory seems plausible or likely, certainly not a theory that can be easily eliminated at this stage. And what I think is ironic about the lack of inclusion here is it's an area that would be, I would imagine, easier to control than some of the things listed. It seems to me that the control of the narrative is vital, control of resources seems to be vital, the imposition of power, vital, further entwining relationships between the state and big pharma and the media. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the WHO Director General, said in July last year that it was premature to rule out a lab leak, a view echoed by the G7 summit in Cornwall. Since then, if anything, the evidence has grown stronger. A book published this month, Preventable, by Professor Devi Sridhar, argues that a lab leak is as likely an explanation as natural spillover and should be pursued until evidence emerges to the contrary. Bill Gates has written a book called How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. Its main message, according to one uncharitable reviewer, is that we can prevent the next pandemic by doing all the things that did not stop the last pandemic, only more faster and harder. But even Mr. Gates does allow that regardless of how COVID started, even the remote possibility of a lab-related pathogen release should inspire government and scientists to redouble their efforts on lab safety, creating global standards. Over the years, laboratory accidents have resulted in deaths of researchers and others from smallpox, anthrax, SARS and other pathogens. In one case, a global epidemic of flu resulted from a mistake with an experimental vaccine in China in 1977. In recent years, there was a dramatic increase in the number of coronaviruses taken from bat caves into labs for experiments, most of them in a city called Wuhan. Wuhan. Now that's been on the news. I've heard of that. Wuhan clan. Wuhan, hold on a minute, that's where this pandemic started. Yeah, but that was very definitely in a wet market. The experiments tested how easily the viruses could be induced to infect human cells. Some scientists compared this to searching for a gas leak with a lighted match. You know how we look back at the relatively recent past and find ridicule in like doctors smoking to advertise tobacco? I feel like that this whole Wuhan situation might one day be regarded with similar disdain. If you've got a virus that began in Wuhan and they're doing those kind of experiments there, what would be the reason for avoiding examining that theory? Well, if the pharmaceutical industry is responsible for the outbreak in the first place, how can we entrust the same pharmaceutical industry with the solution? I suppose that's a little binary because the pharmaceutical industry is vast, but actually, when you look at it, there is an incredible problem with monopolization within the pharmaceutical industry and the agencies that regulate it and figures within the NIH that start to create a sense that these organizations are uncomfortably intertwined and have a lot of shared interests. This pandemic began a long way from where the infected bats live, but very close to the world's leading laboratory for collecting and manipulating SARS-like coronaviruses. That, plus the continuing failure to find an animal infected with the virus in food markets or elsewhere, added to some peculiar features of the virus's genome, has led many to conclude that a proper investigation of the Wuhan Institution of Virology is warranted. What they're doing is still poking around that wet market. Nope, still no bats. We'll get to the bottom of this. Are we going to look at the Wuhan Institute of Virology? No, not quite yet. There's another wet market I'd want to examine before we start looking over there. Why, what are they doing at the moment? They're very busy working on some more bat-like coronaviruses, and luckily, though, the WHO are preparing for the next pandemic. Now, does anyone fancy a spot of lunch? Yes, I think I'll have a little bit of bat soup. But the Institute has refused all requests to open up its 22,000-item database for international inspection, even though doing so could go a long way to reassuring the world. What? You thought there was information that might point to our involvement in the cause of this pandemic? We were organising a surprise birthday party, and that database, that was the guest. Your uncles, your cousins, friends you've not seen for years, and now all my efforts gone to waste. Oh, you're just like your bloody father. So you might think that the World Health Assembly might have put lab safety and transparency of research on the agenda next week at the very least. Yeah, especially if you're trying to look like a plausible, credible organisation. But nowhere are these even mentioned. In February, the WHO held the third COVID-19 Global Research and Innovation Forum. In the titles of the 49 sessions, the word origin did not appear once. By its set up a committee, the WHO seems to be paying no more than lip service to its own commitments to investigating the possibility of a lab leak. Like some Western scientists, it may be hoping the question of the origin of this dreadful pandemic remains unsolved lest the answer ruffle diplomatic feathers. Here's what a pandemic accord should include. A commitment by all national governments to share the genomic data of all viruses collected in the wild and to share details of all experiments being done on potential pandemic pathogens. Yes, including in biowarfare labs. Something similar happens with nuclear research and with airline accidents, so it can be done. We told you last time we spoke about the WHO that there is a petition, and there's a link to the petition in the description, that would mean that the UK would hold a public referendum before signing up to this treaty. Wouldn't that be fantastic? And look, it says here that Parliament considers all petitions that get more than 100,000 signatures. Do you see how many layers there are before something democratic could actually happen? And doesn't the fact that you can even have these petitions suggest to you that democracy could be a lot more immediate than it actually is? Real democracy would mean putting power in your hands. You control your life. You control your community. Your life becomes not about distraction through entertainment and screens. It becomes about the organisation of your own life. For me, one of the biggest problems we're facing in the world right now is the centralisation of power. Whether it's through financial institutions, corporations, governments, we have less and less ability to regulate and control our lives through democratic means. And for me, the WHO is one of the organisations that most easily represents this problem. That's just what I think, of course, though. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Sign up to my mailing list and you can be part of this community. You get a weekly bulletin from me. I'll tell you about all the things I'm up to. A one-day event on July 10th with Vandana Shiva and Wim Hof that you can attend, or maybe we'll stream that for you as well. But you have to sign up to my mailing list in any event. More important than any of that stuff, please stay free.